Report from ABC News is stating that the United States government has intercepted encrypted messages that likely intended to activate Iranian sleeper cells around the world. Now, this is a topic you and I discussed last week after President Trump's military operation began in Iran. We wondered, would the threat level, the risk of terror attack here in the United States, especially from these sleeper cells that we know are embedded in the United States, would that increase? And would these sleeper cells actually be activated? Well, according to ABC News, and I quote, the U.S. has intercepted encrypted communications believed to have originated in Iran that may serve as an operational trigger for sleeper assets outside the country, according to federal government alert sent to law enforcement agencies. The alert, reviewed by ABC News, cites, quote, preliminary signals analysis of a transmission, likely of Iranian origin, that was relayed across multiple countries shortly after the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The intercepted transmission was encoded and appeared to be destined for clandestine recipients who possess the encryption key, the kind of message intended to impart instructions to covert operatives or sleeper assets without the use of the internet or cellular networks. ABC News says it's possible the transmissions could, quote, be intended to activate or provide instructions to pre-positioned sleeper assets operating outside the originating country. This, according to the alert. You are being gaslit. We are being gaslit, you and I, about the threat of radical Islam that we are all now facing. You are more likely at this very moment when you fly on an airplane, when you go to church, at a community event, a gathering of a large number of people, to be a victim of a jihadi terror attack. And yet, you're being told you're crazy. You're being told you're crazy for noticing this reality. Small assumptions allow big lies. I say this over and over on this show. Well, the small assumption in this case is that there is no elevated terror threat. This leads to a very big and dangerous lie, that we should not be on guard, that we should not be vigilant, and that the United States government plays no role in keeping us safe. You're being gaslit, not just from the left. You're being gaslit from politicians like New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who refused to say that the New York City would-be bombers, these wannabe terrorists, were Muslim. They were jihadists. They were attempting to commit an act of terrorism in the name of ISIS. Maybe that's not a surprise that you're being gaslit by Mamdani or by the mainstream media. The mainstream media headlined this bombing attempt in New York City by calling the bomb a mason jar. I also have a mason jar sitting on my desk, and yet this does not spontaneously combust. This is not an IED like was the bomb that was detonated, thankfully non-successfully, outside of the mayor's mansion in New York City. But worst of all, you're being gaslit by the Trump administration. A new report says that the Trump administration has nixed a Department of Homeland Security report that highlighted the increased security risk due to the elevated threat of Islamic terror attacks. We're going to talk about all of this and more today on the Liz Wheeler Show, because these two individuals outside of New York City, or outside the mayor's mansion in New York City, Gracie Mansion, where Zohran Mamdani and his wife reside, there was a protest that some are characterizing as a white supremacist protest, and it very well may have been. I don't know the people that were involved in it. I don't know what their ideology was. What I do know is that the people staging the protest were not throwing bombs. The two people who attempted to bomb the protest were two Muslims. Their names were Amir Balat, or their names are Amir Balat and Ibrahim Qayyumi. Amir Balat and Ibrahim Qayyumi detonated two improvised explosive devices and hurled them into this protest outside of Mamdani's mansion in New York City. Here's video of the attempted terror attack. You'll see Amir Balat is the individual. These are young men is the individual with long curly hair, and Ibrahim Qayyumi is the one who hands Amir Balat the explosive device before Amir lights it on fire and hurls it into the crowd. But for, I don't know, incompetence or the grace of God, this could have been an extremely deadly terror attack, which, according to police reports, the newly released criminal complaint against Amir Balat, this is exactly what he intended it to be. Bill Malugin of Fox News, in addition to reporters from the New York Post, report that Amir Balat told law enforcement agents, told police officers, that he wanted Saturday's attack to be more deadly than the Boston Marathon bombing. When he was asked if he was familiar with the Boston Marathon bombing and if that's what he intended for his own attack, he responded, no, even bigger. It, referring to the Boston Marathon bombing, was only 3 deaths. If we have the video of this, of these improvised explosive device, let's go ahead and play that on the screen. This is Amir Balat that you see on the screen. He's holding in his hand this bomb. He's lighting it with his other hand before he hurls it into the crowd. Go ahead and play the tape. Runs away from law enforcement, jumps a fence before throwing this explosive device. That's just one. He threw 2. The other one he threw over the head of, somewhat ironically, a pro-immigration activist who was on the scene, who had been bellowing into a megaphone at the time that, you know, being someone from New York City, the city welcomes people of all backgrounds into the city. He's trying to portray anybody worried about mass migration and the Islamic takeover of America as being xenophobic bigots. But this is a video. You can see this white man with a megaphone, pro-mass migration activist, being used essentially as a launch pad for the terror attack that was committed. Go ahead and roll this tape.
Born and raised in New York, and we want everyone here to stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside and then tell everyone else.
And then he is quite literally used as a launch pad. Can we roll that tape again? Watch his back as he's saying, we want everyone in New York to stay in New York. Amir Balat uses him as almost as a fulcrum to launch his attack even higher, to launch himself into the air so that he can throw the bomb even further. Watch this again.
We were born and raised in New York.
Watch his back. Keep an eye on his back.
To stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside.
Here he comes.
Tell everyone else.
And then Amir Balat runs away. If this is not the perfect encapsulation of radical leftist ideology and how stupid it is, how dangerous it is. This man in the yellow sweater is on X today saying, I didn't even run away in the face of the terror attack, and it didn't make me into a xenophobic bigot. Well, but for the incompetence of this terrorist, you would have been murdered by him, because he considers you, as he considers all of us, an infidel. And according to the religion of Islam, infidels deserve to be murdered. I don't understand why this is a difficult concept for the left to grasp, when the reality of it was quite literally climbing on his back. Climbing on his back. Let's look at the second view. That's, of course, the first view. Watch as he runs away down the street, and understand that after law enforcement arrested him, this is not my speculation that this young man was committing this terror attack in the name of radical Islam. He admitted this both verbally and in writing to law enforcement. Go ahead and roll this tape. This is Amir Balat. You can see his co-conspirator in the background as well, running away down the street. He then runs back because there is Qayyumi, hands him the second device. He detonates it. This is the precursor video to the first one we showed before he vaults the fence and runs away from law enforcement. Law enforcement then tackles him in the street, immediately capturing him. The crowd of people around are obviously videotaping it. Thank goodness for citizen journalism, because we know that the mainstream media and politicians lie to us, gaslight us, tell us this isn't a threat. We're not stupid. We can see this threat. By the way, this young man, his parents emigrated from Turkey. They are naturalized American citizens. They came here, I believe, in 2017. He was raised in Pennsylvania in a mansion. in a $1 million home. So this idea that terrorism in the Middle East is committed because of, economic disparity or because of desperation, starvation, which is what we're often told by the left to justify terrorism. Well, they don't have any choice but to join these terror groups because they're so economically depressed, they're so oppressed. This is a rich boy from Pennsylvania who came here with his parents, and instead of accepting the American dream, he lived again in a $1 million mansion. He commits a terror attack in the name, listen very carefully to his words in this video, as he is being arrested and put into the police vehicle. What words do you hear coming out of Amir Balat's mouth? You hear him saying, Allahu Akbar. Listen. They handcuff him against the car. Now listen. He says Allahu Akbar. Once he was in police custody and he was being interviewed, he is reported to have said, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of all worlds. I pledge my allegiance to the Islamic State. Die in your rage, you kuffar. Kuffar means infidel. So anybody who does not practice the Islamic faith and who does not pledge allegiance to jihadi warlords. He also added that this, meaning Islam, is not a religion that just stands when people talk about the blessed name of the prophet. We take action. Now, reportedly, this is according to Bill Malugin at Fox News, these comments made by Amir Balat were caught on New York City Police Department body cams. If so, we the public demand to see them immediately. And yet, what is the reaction from the ruling class, from the elitists, from the mainstream media and the politicians? What is the reaction? It is as if a Norm Macdonald joke has actually come to life. We are actually living the reality. Back in December of 2016, the late, great Norm Macdonald tweeted and said, what terrifies me is if ISIS were to detonate a nuclear device and kill 50 million Americans, imagine the backlash against peaceful Muslims. We are quite literally living this reality. A state senator from New York named Liz Kruger tweeted this following the attempted Islamic terror attack. New York, she says, is no place for anti-Muslim hate or any other kind of prejudice. We don't need out-of-state provocateurs sowing fear, division, and violence in our city. No place for anti-Muslim hate? But it's okay. It's an okay place for what? Anti-Christian hate, anti-American hate. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And by the way, the New York Times had originally described these bombs, these improvised explosive devices, as being, just a mason jar filled with nails. But the police chief of the New York City Police Department confirmed that this was, in fact, an operable bomb that could have caused mass destruction, but for a malfunction. Perhaps that's what we might call user error. This could have killed untold numbers of people. And yet, how did the mayor of New York City, this happened outside of his home, outside of Gracie Mansion, which is where the mayor of New York City resides. How did Zohran Mamdani respond? This is what he posted on X. He said, yesterday, white supremacist Jake Lang organized a protest outside Gracie Mansion rooted in bigotry and racism. Such hate has no place in New York City. It is an affront to our city's values and the unity that defines who we are. What followed, Mamdani writes, was even more disturbing. Violence at a protest is never acceptable. The attempt to use an explosive device and hurt others is not only criminal, it's reprehensible and the antithesis of who we are. I want to thank the brave men and women of the NYPD who acted quickly to keep New Yorkers safe. Our officers ran towards danger without hesitation, demonstrating once again the courage and dedication it takes to protect this city every day. My administration, Mamdani writes, is closely monitoring the situation, and I remain in close contact with our police commissioner. Now, the protest outside Gracie Mansion could have been organized by this man named Jake Lang. I've never heard of anybody named Jake Lang. I know nothing about him. I know nothing about his views. He could be a white supremacist. He could be a bigot. He could be a racist. Obviously, all of that would be bad if that were the case. But here's the important part. It wasn't Jake Lang who was throwing a bomb. Who was throwing a bomb? Mayor Mamdani? Well, you'll notice in this post that Mayor Mamdani doesn't name the individuals who have now been charged by the Department of Justice for their terrorism. He doesn't name them. He doesn't say the name Amir Balat. He doesn't say the name Ibrahim Qayyumi. Why is that? He doesn't mention that these individuals who detonated improvised explosive devices, aka bombs, attempting mass murder, were motivated by their jihadi ideology. Why didn't he mention that? He also doesn't mention, as he gushes over the bravery of the NYPD, who, by the way, were very brave. They did rush towards danger. He doesn't mention that he once wanted to defund them, to take away their resources and their training and their ability to protect New Yorkers. This is how Mayor Mamdani reacted to this scene. And by the way, a second explosive device was found in a car in New York City on Sunday, the day after this attack. The New York Police Department released this news and said, in connection with the ongoing investigation into the improvised explosive device deployed yesterday, that would have been Saturday, the New York Police Department has identified a suspicious device in a vehicle on East End Avenue between 81st Street and 82nd Street. NYPD officers have frozen the area around the vehicle and are conducting limited evacuations of buildings in the vicinity while the bomb squad assesses and removes the device. But what does the mainstream media? How does the mainstream media portray this? How do they announce this to you? Listen, if you are only a reader of the New York Times, for example, and thank goodness I know you are not, if somebody out there only reads the mainstream media, not only would they be left ill-informed, they would actually, it would be worse than that. It would be opposite of that. You're not devoid of the truth if you read the New York Times. You are indoctrinated with an active lie. So if you're devoid of the truth, that's sort of passive incompetence, right? A lie of omission. But the New York Times takes it a step further. They not only don't tell you the truth, they plant in your mind a lie about what happens without ever exposing you to the truth. The New York Times headline after this attempted jihadi terror attack in New York City: smoking jars of metal and fuses thrown at protests near mayor's house. Smoking jars of metal and fuses. Now let's see. If we are writers at the New York Times or editors, if we've been trained in journalism and communication, we always try to think, when there's a phrase, of how you can condense that into a more precise single word. So how do we think that we could condense this sentence, smoking jars of metal and fuses? If only there was a word to describe what they, or that accurately encapsulates what they're describing. What would that word be? Oh, well, after receiving backlash, the New York Times updated their headline and actually called it what it was. A bomb was thrown at a protest near the NYC mayor's house, police say. Now, of course, their subtitle is despicably dishonest. The counter-protester accused of throwing the bomb was one of 6 people arrested after a clash with anti-Islamic protesters led by right-wing activist Jake Lang. Well, did you want to mention who the counter-protester was? Amir Balat? Did you want to mention his ideology, that he's a radical jihadist? Did you want to mention that he tried to commit a terror attack, mass murder of people in New York? Or you just want to say the name of the alleged right-wing activist Jake Lang, who may or may not hold despicable views, I have no idea, who wasn't hurting anybody? You are being gaslit, not only by politicians, not only by the mainstream media, but I regret to inform you, you are also being gaslit by the Trump administration. It gives me no pleasure to say this, but I'm committed to telling you the truth all the time. That's what we do here on this show. Whoever is advising the president on the rhetorical strategy of trying to downplay the increased threat level of Islamist terror attacks here at home, whoever is advising the president needs to be fired. Because the very first thing that you and I judge any politician on is whether they are being upfront with us. Are you telling me the truth? Are you being transparent? Or are you lying to me? Are you manipulating me? Are you cherry picking information to try to lead me to think or feel a certain thing? And we, the American people, we're smart. We're not stupid. We have, BS meters a mile long. A new report says that the Department of Homeland Security had compiled a memo warning law enforcement agencies across the nation about the increased risk of terror attacks. There was a press conference scheduled to be held to communicate to law enforcement agencies across the country, state and local, about this increased risk of terror attacks. And yet, at the last moment, the White House reportedly blocked this report from being publicized. I'm going to bring this up on the screen here so that you can see this. This is from the Daily Mail. Donald Trump's White House is blocking top U.S. intelligence agencies from warning law enforcement across the country about rising threats to the homeland tied to his war with Iran, the Daily Mail can reveal. The FBI, Homeland Security, and the National Counterterrorism Center were preparing to put out a joint intelligence statement on Friday to state and local authorities, alerting them of a heightened threat due to the ongoing war in Iran, a senior DHS official said. The bulletin, which was reviewed by the Daily Mail, details, quote, elevated threats by the government of Iran to U.S. military and government personnel and facilities, Jewish and Israeli institutions and their perceived supporters, Iranian dissidents, and other anti-regime activists in the United States. Radicalized individuals with a variety of ideological backgrounds also may see this conflict or other geopolitical events as a justification for violence, the DHS report continues. The 5-page bulletin blocked by the White House provides specific details on how Iranian proxies may carry out attacks across the country. One section explains how local law enforcement can respond to this type of violence. The official title is, quote, a public safety awareness report, elevated threat in the United States during U.S.-Iran conflict. Homeland Security, this is according to the Daily Mail, broke protocol and gave the White House a heads up about the nationwide bulletin hours before it was set to be released. Top Trump officials ordered it placed on hold. The White House did not deny blocking the terror bulletin in a statement to the Daily Mail. White House spokeswoman Abigail Jackson said the White House is coordinating closely with all government agencies to ensure information being disseminated is accurate, up to date, and has been properly vetted, even if that means taking additional time to review to ensure nothing is done in a vacuum. That was the White House statement. The senior DHS official disputed the White House explanation. The three agencies were going to release a joint intelligence statement that would elevate the threat level and start addressing the Iranian threat on American soil. The White House stopped it and verbalized down to DHS that any unclassified, for official use only information going forward concerning Iran has to be reviewed by the White House before any dissemination. DHS's decision to inform the White House was done against the wishes of the FBI leadership, the Daily Mail has learned. White House is now inserting themselves. This can have a chilling effect on keeping state and local law enforcement informed about ongoing terror threats to the homeland posed by Iran, the official said. They don't want anything getting out that says what they're doing in Iran is raising the threat level at home. Typically, the Daily Mail reports these intel bulletins would be issued to law enforcement without input from the White House to avoid politicizing intelligence communications. Intelligence products for law enforcement are supposed to be neutral and fact-based, the official asserted. This is a report from the Daily Mail. Now, here's the thing. Once again, I would remind the president, whoever is advising the White House on downplaying the risk of terror attacks from Iranian sleeper cells here in the United States is making a mistake, because the American people are smart. That's why we cast our votes for Donald Trump. We're not stupid. We detect gaslighting, deception, and a lack of transparency like that. You can think of us like bloodhounds for the truth. We can smell a mile away if someone is not telling us the full truth. We know, we feel, we see an increased threat level. In the past week alone, we've seen 2 of these terror attacks, one that was deadly in the United States down in Austin, Texas. A man wearing a Property of Allah t-shirt opened fire on quote unquote infidels, Americans, at a bar because of President Trump's military operation in Iran. That's not to blame the president for that terror attack, but it does highlight the very real correlation between the response of these terrorists who are in the United States, whether they're citizens, whether they were radicalized before they were sent here and sent as sleeper cells. It doesn't matter. These people that hold a jihadist ideology are waging attacks. This isn't hypothetical. We literally just showed you video. and talked about these improvised explosive devices that attempted a mass murder in New York City. I mean, think about that criminal complaint that was just released about the New York City bomber, Amir Balat. He wanted his attack to be more deadly than the Boston Marathon bombing. This isn't hypothetical. People aren't on edge. It's actually happening. It's happening. And here's the thing. If President Trump or an advisor to President Trump has advised President Trump to be worried about the American people associating an increased threat of Islamist terror attacks with President Trump's military action in Iran, and if the worry is that, oh, people will associate those, very real terror attacks or the threat of them, and therefore have a negative association or a negative perception of President Trump's military action in Iran, I think that is underestimating the intelligence of the American people. I think that the American people are not stupid. The American people, by and large, support President Trump's military strikes in Iran by 3-1. 3-1. People in the United States support President Trump's strikes in Iran, with the caveat, and this is very interesting, with the caveat that the military operation is limited in time. So a new CBS YouGov poll, and I find this to be fascinating, ask Americans if they approved or disapproved of President Trump's military action against Iran, but if they think the conflict would last a certain length of time. So if the conflict lasts days or weeks, 76% of the American people approve. Only 24% disapprove. That means that's a huge majority. 3/4 of the American people say, yeah, we support what you're doing, President Trump, as long as you wrap this up in days and weeks, which is exactly the timeline, by the way, that the president gave us. He said 4 to 6 weeks is the initial plan. Now, wars are dynamic, and you can't always predict what your enemy will do or how operations will go. So there has to be some flexibility. But 76% of people approve. Now, this number drops significantly if this conflict lasts months. It drops into the negative approvals, with only 46% of Americans approving of military conflict in Iran if it lasts months, and 54% disapproving. And then if it lasts years, you've basically lost the entirety of the American electorate here. Only 13% of people approve of military action in Iran if it lasts years. 87% disapprove. This is extremely significant. Because we talked about this last week. I don't want a forever war in Iran. You don't want a forever war in Iran. But maybe most importantly, President Trump does not want forever war in Iran. And in this particular area, I have full confidence in President Trump. The best predictor of future behavior is past actions, and President Trump's past actions, not only did he verbalize his opposition to forever wars philosophically, probably, if we're being honest with ourselves, before we did in the conservative movement. He was kind of the leader in eliminating the neocon philosophy from being a bedrock Republican value and saying, wait a second, we actually shouldn't support that. And the Republican Party and conservative movement, by and large, followed in Trump's footsteps and evolved in their views. He's also shown us, based on military actions that he's taken since he took office a little bit over a year ago, that he does military action without making it a forever war, that a forever war is a deliberate political choice that leaders in both parties have made in the past in our country, but he hasn't. And he took out Iran's nuclear facilities last summer. It lasted 12 days. He completed his military objective and he got out. Same with Venezuela. He extradited, he extracted and extradited Nicolas Maduro, the socialist dictator of Venezuela, in a matter, not days, not weeks, but hours. We didn't even know about this operation until it was over. We woke up the next morning, not to news that it was happening, but to news that it had already happened. President Trump completed an incredible, outstanding, extraordinary military operation, and then he got out. And so this approval rating, if I were the president or the president's advisors, I'd be fascinated by this poll. The vast majority of the American people are supportive of President Trump's military strikes in Iran as long as the operation lasts only days and weeks, which is exactly what the president said was going to happen. And there are some very vocal voices on the right who oppose any military action, seemingly anywhere, for any reason. Any use of the military seems to be immoral, evil, or disgusting in their eyes. But that's not reflective, even though that might be one of the loudest voices, that's not reflective of the views of the vast majority of the American people. The vast majority of the American people, their views are reflected in this CBS poll. And so if I'm an advisor to President Trump, I don't tell the Trump administration that they should hide the increased risk of terror attacks because I fear that it will change people's minds on the military action in Iran, on their approval. I look at this poll and I say, okay, we're doing something supported by the vast majority of the American people. Our views are in line with the views of our voters and 76% of the American people and the views of some people who didn't even vote for us. This is a bipartisan coalition supporting President Trump. I don't fear some change of mind in the electorate based on this increased level. To be honest, the president and his team risk losing support, not because people will associate the increased Islamist terror threat with President Trump's military action. President Trump risks losing support if his own base believes that he's not being transparent with them, if his own base is being gaslit by his team, if his top officials in the White House are putting, the kibosh on this Department of Homeland Security memo warning law enforcement on how to protect, that this threat level is increased and how to protect us, which we know to be true because we've seen it, we've experienced it. We're not dumb. We don't rely on just the mainstream media and just politicians to get our news. We read and research and look at reality ourselves and discern what is true. That's a bigger risk to the Trump administration if he's worried about losing support, is losing the support of the base if we sense that he's not being fully transparent with us. 3-1 support for strikes, for Iran strikes, as long as they're limited in duration. That's certainly how the majority of us feel. Now let's move to the Department of Homeland Security for a second. As we have this increased risk of terror threats in the United States from jihadis, we have a new Secretary of Homeland Security, or we are set to have a new Secretary of Homeland Security. And yet, does this even matter? As Democrats are holding hostage funding for the Department of Homeland Security at a moment that the American people need DHS to keep us safe. And I don't understand. Rewinding just a bit to last week when outgoing Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem sat before the Judiciary Committees of the House and Senate respectively, why was this not a point of focus? Why was her response to every Democrat not to lay at his or her feet the responsibility should the American people be victim to a terror attack? Because that's what should have happened. If anything bad happens, if an attack is successful, if Americans are killed by jihadis here in our homeland, in our neighborhoods, then we should look to Democrats in Congress and say, that's on you. That blood is on your hands. Not just for the mass migration and the open borders, which play a huge role, but in withholding funding for the Department of Homeland Security because you don't like ICE. By the way, a recent poll shows that support for the Democrat Party is lower than support for ICE. People like ICE better than they like Democrats. And you have to wonder why Secretary Noem didn't focus on that point, didn't warn the American people that they could fall victim more likely to a terror attack thanks to Democrats holding hostage funding for the entire department. Now we have incoming Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen will take over for Kristi Noem at the end of this month. And I'd just like to be very clear about something. As we welcome Mark Wayne Mullen on board and we wish him success, I always wish people success in these positions. I want them to do good for the country. I want them to fulfill their responsibilities. I think we, the American voter, need to be much clearer with these cabinet level officials about what we expect from them, about basically a rubric. We need to provide a very clear rubric for how we judge them, so that they're not surprised a year later when we say, listen, you haven't done very well, just as well that you're leaving. We should provide immediately to the Trump administration, to the secretary of whatever department, him or herself, and to each other, a very clear set of expectations about, well, if you fulfill these, we will consider you to be successful. And if you do not fulfill these, we will consider you to be a failure and we will call you out and hold you accountable. So I would like to provide to you today a rubric for incoming Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen. If you fulfill these bullet points, if you fulfill these items, then you will be a successful Secretary of Homeland Security. If you fail to fulfill this must-have list, then you will be a failure, and we will be holding you to account constantly over it. So number one, we expect mass deportations. Not just so-called criminal aliens, which is a stupid term. It's redundant because everyone here in the United States who is here illegally is a criminal just because they are here illegally. Yes, it's fine if you prioritize the deportation of illegal aliens who have committed heinous crimes so that they don't commit any more heinous crimes. But we don't want just illegal aliens who have committed heinous crimes to be deported. We want everyone who has entered our country illegally out right now, period. If you're not able to fulfill this, if you do not succeed, then we will not consider you to be a success. If you do succeed, then we will give you a big round of applause. This includes, by the way, the second must-have, and that is the Department of Homeland Security must target employers who use illegals for labor. You simply won't have a successful effort of mass deportation. It won't work if you do not hold employers accountable. Because the reason so many illegals come here is because there's a good job market for them. And employers, big businesses, hire illegals, even though it's not legal for them to do so. If you do not start holding employers accountable, then there's still going to be a good job market and illegals are still going to come here. You cannot have mass deportations without taking away the jobs for the illegals. That's something that Secretary Noem failed to do. It's something that incoming Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen must do if he wants us to consider his tenure at DHS a success. Number three is speed up building the border wall. Did you know that there's about 1,500 miles of this smart wall along our southern border, and it's only about half built? Half of it still has not been built. Half of it. How many years has Donald Trump been president? He was president for 4 years, and now he's been president again for a year. That's 5 years, and we've only built half of it. We cannot successfully close our border unless the border wall is built. We must speed that up. The next must-have is these terror cells, which are embedded in the United States. We know this. There was a report that said that the Biden administration released into the United States at least 99 known individuals on the terror watch list. They simply disappeared into the shadows. Where are they? What are they doing? What are they plotting? Who is supporting them? Where are they getting their money? We don't know. Biden lets them roam free in the United States. They must be rooted out. The American people should not be afraid to go on an airplane or afraid to gather in large numbers. We must get the terrorists out of here. So, as well as the Department of Homeland Security has targeted the heinous criminals who are here illegally, we must also target these terrorists, find them, identify them, get them out of here so that our homeland is safe. The next item, which is a must-have, is to denaturalize and deport Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is not a natural-born American citizen. She is a naturalized American citizen, and her citizenship is based on a fraud. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's citizenship was based on her father. Her father immigrated to the United States. He sought asylum here because he claimed that the regime in Somalia was going to kill him. It was the Siad Barre regime. It was a violent Marxist regime. And he said, I fear for my life. I need to come to the United States to keep myself and my family safe. Well, what Ilhan Omar's father failed to disclose to U.S. immigration authorities at the time was that he was actually an official in this violent Marxist Siad Barre regime. And perhaps he feared for his life, but not because the regime was coming after him. He feared for his life because the people of Somalia had overthrown that violent regime, and they were holding to account the officials who had inflicted violence on the people of Somalia. If you fail to disclose information that you were a colonel, probably specializing in propaganda, as Ilhan Omar's father probably did in Somalia, as you are claiming asylum, well, you have committed fraud and your citizenship is invalid. Ilhan Omar's citizenship was contingent on her father's asylum claim. If her father's asylum claim was fraudulent, then Ilhan Omar's citizenship is invalid. We shouldn't ignore this. This isn't political fodder. This is right and wrong. This is a matter of justice. She must be denaturalized and deported because her citizenship is not real. The final element in this rubric for incoming Department of Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin is to release the CISA files. Now, you'll remember the cybersecurity sub-agency at the Department of Homeland Security was caught colluding with big tech to censor Americans. You and me, we were censored. This happened from 2019 all the way through 2024. During the COVID years, when you couldn't post online about anything transgenderism or anything related to vaccines or anything related to COVID or criticism of Joe Biden. Those files exist within the Department of Homeland Security. Those CISA files exist. We must have a complete internal audit to ensure that the bad actors who engaged in this behavior during this time frame are not just fired, but are held to account for abusing their power and weaponizing the federal government against us, private citizens. This is the rubric. This is the rubric. If you complete these items, if you are successful in, a check mark on each of these items, then incoming Secretary Markwayne Mullin, we will be your biggest cheerleaders. If you fail to accomplish these, then this is why we would consider you to be a failure. And I think it's only fair that we communicate this up front. We should probably start doing this more often and more thoroughly with all politicians, but all members of the administration as well, so that their expectations are not vague. Their expectations are concrete. All right. James Talarico, the Senate candidate, the Democrat Senate candidate in Texas, he's not just gone viral. He's gone viral because he is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I mean that in the biblical way. He is in seminary to become a pastor. So he purports to speak in the name of Christ. And yet what he says is heresy. It's blasphemy. It's downright demonic. And we have people on our side of the aisle who claim to be political and religious conservatives who are defending him as a good Christian. I'd like to share with you my response to that David French write-up here shortly. But first, I want to say, if you watch my show, then you know I talk a lot about courage, the courage to speak the truth, the courage to stand alone if necessary, the courage to live out your faith boldly in a culture that increasingly demands your silence or punishes you for noting reality. Because let's be honest, Christianity is under attack. Biblical truth is mocked. Traditional values are smeared. Corporate media pushes narratives that are not just anti-conservative, they're openly anti-Christian. And Democrats run candidates that act more like the Antichrist than the Christians they claim to be. That's exactly why Blaze TV exists. Blaze TV isn't just a streaming service. It's a faith-driven mission. It's a company built on the belief that truth matters, that God-given rights matter, that Christians have a responsibility to engage the culture rather than retreat from it. When you subscribe, you are doing more than watching programming that you enjoy. You're supporting a Christian faith-based company that refuses to compromise with the lies of the culture. So if you're looking for content that strengthens your convictions instead of undermining them, I invite you to join us. Go to blazetv.com and subscribe today. You can use my code Liz to save $20 on your annual subscription. That is blazetv.com. Use my code Liz to save yourself $20. All right, David French. Listen, let me back up a little bit here. I once admired David French. 15 years ago, when I began to participate in the conservative movement, David French was one of the big guys. David French was one of the intellectual thought leaders of the conservative movement who actually put his money where his mouth is. He litigated violations of free speech on behalf of conservative students on college campuses. And he didn't just write about it, he did it. He's an attorney, obviously, and he didn't just, now he writes a column in the New York Times, but at the time, if a student on campus was censored or punished or targeted by the school for being conservative, he sued the school on their behalf. And I admired him greatly for this. So many conservatives talk the talk and don't walk the walk. And David French wasn't one of those guys at the time. Well, fast forward a decade and a half later, and David French, to use President Trump's words, has lost his way. David French has seemingly sold out. David French not only openly voted for Joe Biden, but now he is defending James Talarico, the radical leftist Democrat candidate for Senate in the state of Texas. James Talarico, the man who said that God is non-binary, James Talarico, the man who says that there are 6 biological sexes, the man who says that the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary to communicate to her that the Holy Spirit would conceive a child within her. James Talarico says the Annunciation is proof that God is pro-abortion. David French, who in this very piece defending James Talarico claims to be a social, religious, and political conservative, defends James Talarico as a good Christian. This is what French writes. Put simply, if the primary American divide is between right and left, then Talarico isn't that interesting. There's a long history of progressive religious activism in the United States, just as there is a long history of conservative religious activism. White evangelicals might be overwhelmingly Republicans, but American Christians are remarkably diverse politically, and we've been arguing with one another for a long time. Yet, if the primary American divide is between decent and indecent, then the equation changes. Talarico shines. Or to put it another way, Talarico is one of the few openly Christian politicians in the United States who acts like a Christian. And by acting like a Christian, he reveals a profound contrast with so many members of the mega Christian movement that's dominated American political life for 10 years. So my question to David French is this. Which of James Talarico's positions do you find to be decent? Which is how you described him. Which do you find to be Christian? I'll give you some options. Perhaps is Talarico's claim that white people are infected with the virus of racism? Perhaps Talarico's claim that God is non-binary? Maybe Talarico's claim that there are 6 biological sexes, or Talarico's atrocious claim that the Annunciation demonstrates that God is pro-abortion. Mr. French, which of these positions is decent? Which is Christian? Please be very specific. Now, David French in his article engages in a somewhat deceptive rhetorical tactic in which he claims to have disagreement policy-wise with James Talarico, while still ascribing to Talarico what he calls orthocardia. What is orthocardia? David French defines orthocardia as having the right heart. The right heart. I'm not exactly sure what this means. Seems like it might mean the right intentions, but it seems like David French might actually be referring to James Talarico's demeanor. His demeanor is nice. His demeanor is soft. His demeanor is not bombastic. His demeanor is quiet. It's not loud. To ascribe a rightly ordered heart from one's demeanor is not properly ordered when you hear the political positions that James Talarico believes in. For example, I'm going to show you a video right now of an interviewer asking James Talarico, what besides family and friends do you love? What is something that you love besides family and friends? And this is how James Talarico responded.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, I'm just saying this because it's on my mind, the trans children who showed up yesterday at the state capitol to advocate for their humanity. They shouldn't have to, but it was an inspiration to watch.
So the first thing that comes to mind when James Talarico is asked about something that he loves besides family and friends is trans kids. Well, the first word that comes to my mind when I watch that video is, what a creep, what a groomer. Mr. French, how can you conflate a seemingly soft demeanor and squeaky clean face with what you describe in your article, the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? What is loving about politically supporting abortion? What is kind about advocating for queer theory, the transgender ideology, to be inflicted on the minds and bodies and souls of children? How is that embodying goodness or faithfulness to the Bible, to the Word of God? Because his words are spoken softly? How is he advocating for self-control when he advocates for abortion, which is often, studies show, used as birth control? Because people don't exercise self-control and have sex outside of marriage and become pregnant and don't want to be inconvenienced by the responsibility for their actions, that sex cannot be decoupled from procreation. James Talarico is not Christian. He does not embody Christianity. He does not embody decency. He embodies the opposite. And I can think of very few people in the conservative movement who have disappointed me more than this devolution of David French, who you don't have to like President Trump. We don't have to agree on all political positions or political strategy, but to try to whitewash James Talarico's openly evil positions and comments that are in direct opposition to the word of God as being decent and Christian, well, that is also evil. That is also evil. All right. You feel the gaslighting, the narrative control, the constant rewriting of reality, while these people, the mainstream media, politicians, pundits, look you straight in the face and tell you not to believe your own eyes. Well, that, my friends, is why Frontier Magazine issue 5 matters, because in a culture built on manipulation, the thesis of today's episode, holding something permanent is powerful, something researched, something intentional, something that doesn't disappear because big tech decides it's inconvenient. Issue 5 is bold, substantive, and unapologetic. It tackles the cultural battles everyone else is too afraid to name, and it does it with clarity, facts, and conviction. Now, the only way to get Frontier Magazine is through Blaze Unlimited. Blaze Unlimited isn't just content, it's community. It's members-only content, premium perks. It's a front row seat to the fight for truth. And right now, you get the same deal as last issue. The first 50 subscribers who use promo code Frontier40 will get $40 off, plus digital access to issues 1, 2, 3, and 4, so you can see exactly how we got here. These issues do sell out every time, so don't wait. Go to blazeunlimited.com/Liz and use promo code Frontier40. That's blazeunlimited.com/Liz. Use promo code Frontier40. All right, guys, make sure you subscribe to the show at youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler, and on Spotify, we are The Liz Wheeler Show. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.